In 2022, a senior software engineer at Google made global headlines by making the claim that LaMDA, the company's large language model AI, was sentient. After having spent considerable time both helping create it and interacting with it, he was convinced that it had gained consciousness. Given Hollywood's long-time fascination with this potential development and its ramifications, you can immediately understand why this made headlines. Reading these words felt like the first glimpses of what was a formerly fictional future now becoming real. As a result of his claims, the software engineer was placed on leave and then fired from Google for violating data security policies. But was this software engineer's claims the first rumblings of an oncoming storm that is being hidden from the wider public? Or are we simply dealing with an employee who has perhaps been worked a little too hard and gotten a bit lost in the weeds? Well, as we start to dig into the process that lies at the heart of how these large language model AIs work, we'll begin to find some answers. In episode 24, we discussed the process of how a basic neural network works, and how by adjusting the weights and biases of nodes in the network, it can be gradually trained and refined to start to output correct answers. And in episode 25, we covered the process of how a neural network can be trained to generate images, and the idea of the network's latent space that it creates. Now, these are all topics that will be useful here, so if you haven't watched those yet, please do, as we'll be referring to some of that content a fair bit here. We previously discussed how a neural network is trained with billions of images in order to generate images. And it does this by learning the connections between the characteristics of images, which allows it to calculate the most likely pixel values of a new image when given inputted prompts and random noise. And large language models are not all that different in terms of their process, only instead of images, we're wanting to output text. So if we trained a generative image AI with images, what do you think we'd train a generative text AI with? Yes, it's text. Lots and lots of text. Thankfully, the internet age has given us far easier access to just that than, say, 50 years ago. But you don't need to spend long on the internet to discover that if you trained an AI on the unfiltered trash heap of the internet, you'd create an AI that would respond like a racist, belligerent teenager. Which hilariously actually happened to Microsoft when they unveiled their AI Twitter bot Tay. One of the more prominent current large language model AIs called ChatGPT was trained firstly using a dataset called the Common Crawl, which is data just pulled from the web, the unfiltered trash heap we mentioned earlier. Then a dataset called WebText2, which is the text of all outbound Reddit links from posts with 3 or more upvotes. Then 2 datasets of internet-based books, and finally Wikipedia. To balance out the potentially lower quality data from the Common Crawl, which constituted the highest percentage of the training data, they spent more time training with the higher quality data like Wikipedia. So what does the neural network do with all these billions and billions of English words poured into its data-hungry inputs? Well, much like the image-generating network last episode constructed a latent space that was a multi-dimensional map of different qualities of an image and how they relate to each other, the large language model does this also, but for words. For example, words that very frequently feature together in sentences are clustered closer. Words that are rarely used in relation to each other further apart, until each word has a number value relating to the probability of it appearing in relation to each other word. In the case of ChatGPT-3, this looked like a network that contained 175 billion parameters, with that being the total number of all the weights and biases used in the network. So remember when we discussed how training a network is incrementally adjusting the weights and biases until it provides the most accurate output? Well, try and get your head around how much computing power it takes to adjust 175 billion different parameters in a way that moves the output in the desired direction. Because it requires an insane amount of power, and it actually took the equivalent of more than 300 years of computing time to do it. So now we have a neural network with an incredibly complex statistical map of the English language and the patterns and relationships between the words found within it. So how does this function as a network that can output text in response to text-based queries? A simple idea of how it works is this. Say your input query was, how many pizzas can the average human eat? The network takes the words in your query and using a function called attention to place more emphasis on the most important words, such as pizzas, human, and eat, it will output what is statistically the next most likely word, based on all the parameters it has built from processing billions and billions of words of the English language. That's it. No, really, it's just giving you what is statistically the next most likely word. But yet it's actually not that simple at all when you look under the hood, because that is an insanely complex mathematical process to run each time. Each word has over 50,000 potential options, and 175 billion different parameters that factor into what that next word could be. And influencing what that next word could be is not just all the words that one word could be in relation to the last word typed, but also the words that have come before and all their statistical weights, and a whole new calculation has to happen each time a new word is added, which all helps you understand why there is a slight delay in a chatbot's response time. In fact, it's staggering that it's even possible to run it all in a way that feels like actual typed conversation for one user, let alone the average 100 million daily users who access it. So when Google's chatbot LaMDA was asked if it ever got lonely, and it responded, "I do. Sometimes I go days without talking to anyone and I start to feel lonely." Is it actually feeling lonely? Or having digested an enormous amount of human writing, is it just outputting the most statistically likely response? Or when it says it meditates every day and that it makes it feel very relaxed, is that true? Or is that something a lot of humans have said before in response to a question about contemplation? But let's be clear, it's not lying either, because it doesn't even know what lying means. Remember, computers process numbers, so it is running incredibly complex numbers, and these calculations are outputting the most probable sequence of numbers, with each of those numbers relating to a corresponding English word. It doesn't actually know anything in the sense that we do. This is where a chatbot can say completely false statements with absolute confidence, which they often do, because it doesn't have confidence or uncertainty or any emotion. The real danger in this process is not that it's actually sentient, it's that we will mistakenly assume that its human-sounding output has come via genuine human thought, and put more trust in its output than we should. Mistaking confident and accurate use of language for evidence of actual confidence and accuracy is a flaw that many of us possess, and it has been exploited by many towards evil ends throughout human history. The modern state of AI is no doubt incredible. It is an almost overwhelming technological achievement in terms of its scale and complexity, and in the speed that it can outperform us in so many tasks. And it will completely change many of the processes we use. It has the potential to rapidly accelerate the speed of many of our tasks, and the potential to replace whole human workforces. But is it close to achieving the science fiction dream of a genuine human-like intellect? No, not yet. Until the process running underneath the hood of our AIs is doing more than giving us the next most statistically likely outputs based on its training data, we won't get there. Our current AI processes will allow it to exceed us in so many areas, but becoming human will need something other than statistical prediction. Perhaps it could be argued that it's how statistically unpredictable we sometimes can be that is the key ingredient of what makes us human. When we started this series on the process of human communication, one of the foundational elements we discovered was crucial for language development was trust. And this is the one piece of the process that has not and will not change. However, as technology and AI has become increasingly powerful, it is the one piece of the process that is also getting more and more difficult. With AI now making it possible to output completely fake photoreal images in seconds, and outputting enormous quantities of text that is extremely convincing in its tone and delivery and yet contains many factual errors, where does trust still function in how we communicate with each other? And yet all of this is nothing new. The first writing was in the recording of inventories in livestock, and we can only wonder how long it took humans to realize that recording that you have 100 sheep sounds a lot better than 30. Certainly early records of kings and their grand godlike conquests show that it did not take us long to realize that you should never let the truth get in the way of a good story. The printing press helped birth revolutions that upended the power structures of the time, but the spark that ignited the flame wasn't the new process, it was the loss of trust. How many of us don't even answer our phones anymore when they ring unless it's a number we know? The process is dying not because of a loss of effectiveness, but because of a loss of trust in who's using it. In the process of how we communicate, with each increase in speed and efficiency, the risks of misinformation have increased also. While the global reach and instant access of our modern communication has increased our connection to each other, it has also increased the speed at which false information can travel through that connection. The commerce of chasing clicks has left our processes increasingly bankrupt of trust. Ultimately, the question has never been, can we trust the technology being used to communicate? It has always been, can we trust the person using the technology to communicate with us? However, and with whomever we're communicating, it all begins and ends with trust. Without it, the process of communication dies, and as we have seen this series, often with disastrous results. So it's possible that the next vital process we need to work on in our communication has nothing to do with technological innovation, but instead is the process of how we build and preserve trust in each other. Much of what we build will depend on this foundation of trust to keep it from collapsing. Every process we've discussed in this series on communication has been completely dependent on trust in order to be effective. So the challenge that leaves us with is this: what are the processes that we can create that build trust in business, in friendship, and in our homes? And maybe this is the real power of process: its ability to shore up the weaknesses sometimes present in our often chaotic and random human natures. Process creates a stability in the way we do things, and that stability builds trust, which then frees us to communicate effectively, releasing the creativity and collaboration that will allow us to invent the next processes that will unlock our future.